Hi, welcome to Dev Central. My name is Jason Rahm, and we are kicking off a Guru panel on Advanced Firewall Manager here at Agility 2013 in San Francisco. Today I have with me Tom Guerrette.
Hi.
Tom, how are you?
Good, good.
Tom is the product manager for our Advanced Firewall Manager. And also I have Preston Hogue. Preston is our Director of Security Architectures. So today we're going to talk about the Advanced Firewall Manager and tell me a little bit about why the product, what market led to that product.
Well, we started off with the data center firewall market, where we're actually sitting with LTM in front of application servers, and in a way we were protecting them already, but we wanted to make more of a package for manageability reasons around applying policy as you're protecting traffic as it comes into the data center.
Okay. Yeah, so personal experience with the big IP over the years, it is a default deny box, so it's by nature firewalling all the connections coming through. But the policy manager, that gives you the advanced access to manage those connections a little cleaner, and brings, what other features does the Advanced Firewall Manager bring?
So policy and access control, as we said, and also DDoS and DOS.
Okay, which is absolutely huge, as the DDoS, especially on the internal list, seems like we have customers and non-customers reaching out. It's like, whoa, attacks. It seems to be coming, not used to be maybe a couple times a month, and now it seems like it's happening more and more each day. So, all right, well, Network World had an article that came out last week, and it was kind of a surprise to some of us that we weren't even really sure that they were looking at stuff, but we made some claims, and of course all vendors make claims, and some people like to challenge those claims, and so they wrote a piece and said, hey, F5 actually not only meets the claims, but there were some surprising findings in their article. And Preston, what was surprising that they found?
Well, I think from F5's perspective, there wasn't anything surprising, right? It's exactly what we've been saying from the inception of our company. I think what we've done with this article is we've educated the marketplace that taking an intrinsic approach to security. So we know TCP stack because we're a full proxy. We know HTTP because we actually are acting as that HTTP server when we're proxying it. SSL is the same thing. So all of a sudden, when you have higher demands for those protocols, which in the instance of a malicious demand, being a DDoS, we are able to sustain speeds that no one else on the globe is able to do. And so what we've done in this article is prove by having an intrinsic approach, we can not only put firewall in place, but we can also perform better when load balancing and firewall collectively together, because we intrinsically know those applications that we are actually protecting. So once again, it's just proof is in the pudding, and we now have external evidence that it proves what we've been saying the entire time.
Yeah, I know we've found oftentimes you put the F5 in place and it speeds up the applications, but certainly you add the layer of security, and you think, well, if I'm doing the inspection, if I'm doing those things, it's going to slow my application down, but that hasn't been the case at all. So that's exciting to have that external validation.
When you look at it, the inception of firewalls, the really nice thing to have Tom on this panel is, he's been with the company a short amount of time, but he actually was with Cisco in the days that they acquired the overall PICs. Before, he was actually with the PICs company. And the interesting thing is, firewall started off really, stateful inspection or packet filters to begin with, and then stateful inspection. And the firewall approach has always been really very simplistic separation of overall 5-tuple, right? You look at a port, you look at an IP address, and the reality of the situation is, as we've migrated more into applications, especially web applications, there's a much higher demand for understanding those individual protocols. And so I think we're really showing the market that it is absolutely necessary not only to, understand what is traversing our individual box, but also understand how to apply the security associated to into each of those applications.
Yeah, and I found that as well, that especially as everything is becoming webified, even if you only have port 80 and port 443 open, if everything is coming in port 80, then you're not really firewalling much just by port. So having that higher fluency in the applications is critical. All right. Well, what else did you find significant in the article?
I would say, and it kind of goes on top of what Preston said, but the fact that the test bed without a firewall in place tested at a certain level, and I think they had a max of 80 gigs, and then with our box there, it was higher. So I obviously most people would have an eyebrow raised about that. How can it be higher? And it's because we actually improved the efficiency of the actual test bed with our box there, doing application load balancing and firewalling together. So because of the function that we do with application awareness and then applying security while we're already doing that, there's no sort of layered hit for doing load balancing and security firewalling together.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
All right, well, why don't we get into some questions? I heard, first question in here is, I heard that you should be using high-speed logging with the firewall, especially during an attack. Why is that?
So it's pretty simple, right? When you look at an attack, when you're a firewall like our competitors and you are able to keep up with speeds that, when you look at I/O on an individual box, most of our firewall competitors don't have an issue because they can't handle the connections per second. If you look at F5, of course, we can handle up to 10 million plus connections per second. So the correlation of that on an event per second of logging is that you need a very, very high throughput on events per second. And so on box for any system that has I/O, so any hard drive, even solid state is going to have some form of limitation on I/O. So getting those events per second off the box as fast as you can, especially when you're in high volume environments and you're dealing with DDoS attacks, is extremely critical. Otherwise, your event logging is actually going to do an additional DDoS and only exacerbate the overall issue.
Yeah. Okay. And so logging itself, obviously, being a firewall, you need a security log. And,
absolutely.
Yeah. And so, in fact, some of the criteria, I mean, some people they firewall and they have the rules in place, but they don't really care about the logs. But in some environments, and it's actually required. If the box stops logging, by default, it has to stop passing traffic.
The correlation in this instance, though, when you say some, generally, when you have that volume of traffic, it means you have an event. An event normally means there's an incident, and an incident normally means that you need forensics. So, I mean, even those customers that generally may not have as much of a concern around logging, under the instance that they're under attack, they are going to be interested in having forensics data to understand who did that attack, especially when there's a financial impact to that organization.
Yeah, and so getting it off box is critical.
It's critical.
Yeah. All right. So next question in here is, like, what do you guys mean by application-centric policy management?
So the way that it's a new approach in actually writing firewall rules, and it's with the application in mind that you're protecting as you do that, right? So we can internally to the box, we can divide out the way that rules go to an application. So let's say that you're protecting a web server, and it's a specific application web server, and you write policy for that in that set, in that place in the box. If you decommission that later, then you can decommission that service along with the rules that go with it, and then you don't have stale rules later. Many times when I talk to firewall administrators, there's rules that are 10 or 15 years old, and the application's been gone for 10 years, and then they keep asking us to support more rules, and it's because there's a lot of stale rules on their existing firewall. We're doing it this way so that we can make it easy for new rules to be added, and traffic that's subjected to that services is only subjected to those rules. So if you think about it, we're dividing out internally traffic to specific applications as we protect from an application-centric view, and then writing the rules there.
Okay, so from an administrative standpoint, if I'm going in and I'm managing these rules, are those rules something I would apply in an application view, or would that be something that I would just, there would be a drop down next to the rule I'm adding that I would apply that?
You create policy and then you apply it to the virtual server where that application is targeted.
Okay, so just like any other profile, like an SSL profile or an HTTP profile, I'm going to create a policy for those set of rules. I'm going to apply it to the virtual server. When I delete that virtual server, boom, those rules are gone.
Absolutely.
So perfect. Yeah, that's great, because I used to manage ASAs and PIXs and way back in the day, CyberGuard firewalls, and you'd get these rule sets, thousands of lines long, and you're right, at the end of the year you have to do the security audit, and you're like, we have no idea what these rules do, but we don't want to break anybody by pulling them, and so then you end up with those archived rules that never go away.
Something that's very important here to make a distinction, right, is that you look at the next generation firewalls, right, which is definitely a purpose-built firewall for a specific use case, and they talk about applications, right, and so it's very important that we provide a distinction here that when we talk applications, we're really talking about that inbound use case, right? Customers have customized apps that they're protecting within a data center. And why that's so critically important is because when we talk about, they have the ability, the next generation have the ability that if I'm sitting here and I'm going out to Facebook, that they can make sure that I don't do blogs or forums. That's a completely different type of application protection that we're talking about. If you've got applications in your own environment and you want to protect them, I mean, what Tom was mentioning was you can put an HTTP DDoS policy, you can put a DNS DDoS policy, you can put a network firewall policy, you can put an IP intelligence policy, you can take an iRole, apply it to that individual. Every single thing is a container that's applied to the individual application that we're protecting, not the individual user that's going to an application.
Correct.
And why this is so important is, as you mentioned before, and I just want to reinforce this, that all of a sudden that app gets decommissioned, you decommission that VIP and the entire policy in itself has now been decommissioned. And that, from an operational perspective, this ties back to that article, right? The reason that we were able to be so much more efficient is because realistically, every single portion of the policy has been distinctly created for that individual application, where the other types of firewalls are really creating such blanket statement policies that they can never be that efficient. The firewalls themselves weren't designed for the purpose of protecting data centers. They were designed for the purpose of corporate outbound use case, where they're going out, getting malware, and they want to ensure that that malware is not brought in. We are distinctly focused on securing the data center.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so next question is, are the AFM firewall rules just iRules, or are they different things?
Very different things. So you can have iRules, and AFM supports iRules, and all the things that you know about doing with iRules, you still have that flexibility. But it is a set of policy, rules, and rule lists that are applied as AFM rules. So it's not just iRules, it's actual AFM rules.
And it's not, under the hood, it's not iRules at all.
Fully supported AFM policy.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So could you replicate an AFM policy in a rule completely, or is there something in an AFM policy that is that you have more access to? Like, can you do more with an AFM policy than you can do with an iRule?
Well, iRules are written for custom purposes, so it depends on what you want to do with them. I wouldn't say you can do more or less, but we are adding functionality to the AFM rules and policy as we have more releases of Big IP. Where iRules are what you custom write, obviously.
And it's a supported configuration in AFM, whereas in the iRules that you write, not that we don't support iRules, but it's a supported configuration.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So something we left out, because we've been talking about policies, right? We have three distinct different tiers of policies. We have a global level, which is applicable to all route domains and all applications that would exist within VIPs, right? And then we also have the ability to then go one layer deeper, and we're able to do route domain type policies. And if you've got multiple route domains and you want to have separation of duty, we still can support that old school traditional zone. We're not saying there's anything wrong with the zone, but the key element is that we're adding that additional tier, which we've already dived in pretty deep on. So the functionality really is about the implementation of the tiering, and then the true distinction. We're looking at a 5-tuple, right? We're creating network policies, where that iRule, as Tom has talked about, the tuples it's almost undefined, right? You can do almost anything you want, and we wanted to have a very standardized approach that is similar to any other firewall on the planet, even though our approach is different.
Yeah.
Firewall people, like Tom, for instance, was dealing with firewalls 15 years alone, or plus years. we still need to apply policies in a similar fashion, right, in regards to the traditional way, but at the same time, we obviously have those different tiers and the approach from an application perspective.
And just coming back to iRules for a minute, because we eat, breathe, and sleep iRules. iRules are great for when you need to use them, but our number one best practice with iRules is if you don't need it, don't use it. So it would always be preferable to use a policy over using an iRule. You just use it if you need it. All right. Next question we have, when deploying an AFM and also ASM, I am thinking the AFM would be in front of the LTM with the ASM behind the LTM. Okay, we might need a whiteboard on this one. At a high level, is that correct? The AFM would need to be as close to the border as possible.
Yeah. So AFM and LTM can be deployed, and ASM, all three of them can be deployed on the same box. So when they're on the same box, then it's just sort of how the order of processing happens internally, and it really depends on what the flow is and what's happening there. But if you talk about them being external, and let's say the example, I think what this person was trying to get at is an LTM plus AFM, and then an LTM plus ASM. And so ASM is web, layer 7 web security, which is best closest to the web servers. So you could think of that as being closest to the web server, and then AFM from a policy perspective mixed in with LTM as its load balancing traffic to those web servers.
Okay, so you keep AFM closer to the border, ASM closer to the app.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, next question. Is AFM EAL certified, and if not, is it planned to be?
Yeah. So the answer, there are several levels of EAL, and they take a lot of time to be certified. We have EAL 2 already, okay. And 4 is in progress, and it takes a lot of time to do that. So in a year or two we will have EAL 4.
Okay.
Yep.
So underway, but takes time.
Yeah.
All right. Is it possible to limit user access only to the firewall rules part if we have two different teams managing the LTM and firewall security components?
Yeah, so this is effectively role-based access control, and yes, we have that with our BigIQ central management platform.
Okay, so from a BigIQ perspective, if you have that deployed, you can manage only the firewall rule sets.
Yeah, and as more releases of BigIQ come, there'll be actually more roles there because we actually want a further division of roles inside as opposed to just AFM or LTM. We're adding that into the single box as well in a future release.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Next question, could you dynamically redirect a connection from a live service to a honeypot in order to enable gathering of data about an attack?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah. So, there are a few different ways you could do that. We have a way to clone traffic. So as part of the AFM rules, we can say clone this, and then if you send it out to an interface where there's a honeypot, you can do that at the same time as actually forwarding the traffic to the server. So depending on what you want to do there. You can also add an iRule to an AFM rule that redirects it to a virtual server that is a honeypot. So it depends on which way you want to slice it. There's several ways to do it.
Okay, so you can actually accomplish that without the iRules, which is exciting because I know that we can absolutely do that with iRules, but to know that it's baked in is awesome. Okay. So, what about the management of the policy itself? Are there any? I'm trying to gather my thought here. With the firewall rules that you apply, just can you talk about the GUI as far as the policy itself?
Yeah, as Preston said, there's 3 different major domains where you can apply policy, and the first is the global rules. So that would be where you put policy that's you want all the traffic flowing through the box to be subjected to. So this rule is for everything. And then there is the virtual server level, and that is the app-centric kind of view for writing policy. And then if you have different tenants or contexts around route domains, you can apply rules there as well. Let me tell you about one of the newest things that we just did, and it's called staged policies. And from my perspective, it's kind of unique to firewalls for having this. you have a policy that's running and enabled as your live policy, and it's blocking, denying, logging, whatever you have for your configuration around the rules there. You can create a second policy, or actually multiple policies, and then switch what you deploy. And this is around, well, what if I make a change to that policy? How will that affect the traffic that's flowing through the box? And so I can apply a policy in a staged mode, and I'll get the log events of what would happen if that policy were applied.
Okay.
So, hey, if I make this rule, what will happen? And it'll tell me, stage policy says that would have been dropped in the log event.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's really good for not making a typo and a mistake,
right.
or actually seeing what would happen when I'm maybe adding a firewall and converting a policy from an existing firewall. Lots of different ways that can be used.
Okay. So is it like a visual policy editor, kind of like?
It's a staged policy applied to the traffic that's flowing through the box, but not taking action, but telling you what it would have done.
Okay. As far as like actually the configuration of the rules, is that like a visual policy editor, or is it text-based?
It's the same. So when you go in the GUI where you're applying the policy, you say staged or live.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Something else that's very important, I think, to mention about that, right? If you look at operational, I mean, I don't know how many customers, and I know Tom and I, we've talked about this in the past, that you talk to, and they literally, the last company I was at, we would sometimes troubleshoot policies for 72 hours.
Yeah.
And so in this instance, you're not having to, because imagine those very complex environments where you don't know the impact that you're going to have when you put in a policy. And so you put a policy in place, you find out the impact based on it having an impact. From this perspective, there's no other firewall that exists on the planet where you can actually put the policy in place, validate that policy is not going to affect the operational environment negatively, and then actually provision the policy. I mean, back to, if you look at this, the firewall and what we've been talking about, right, through this entire time, you'll hear us mention operational security a lot. Because the reality of the situation is you cannot put an actual device in front of your applications without it being operationally sound. And something else that I think that we need to open up the horizon on when we discuss this is that all the other components that are core of who we are still part of this firewall. As an example of that is that if we can create custom app monitors that will actually look at an individual application, and if that app is down, we can load balance to another data center.
Right.
Why that becomes so, think about how critically important that is. If you have any of our competitors' firewalls and the entire application infrastructure behind it goes down, Firewall is still smiling just like it was before it went down.
Exactly.
It literally has, ear-to-ear smiles. From our perspective, because we are intrinsically involved in that application, if that app goes down, we know that app goes down. We've already made a decision to either talk to other components within the network to add more resources, because maybe it's not malicious. Or if it's malicious, maybe we're going to send it to another data center that only does scrubbing. We can do all kinds of different aspects that are inherent within the overall application delivery controller as well.
Yeah, that's great. Can we circle back to the DDoS protection in Advanced Firewall Manager? So we have the policy additions, but what kind of functionality do we have within the DDoS domain?
So DDoS in itself, you're going to hear a lot of vendors over the next couple of years come out and attempt to talk DDoS. Right, and the reality of the situation is DDoS is a complex problem, right? It goes from service providers are dealing with it on their network when they look at SIP and they look at DNS and those other aspects of it, right? And then just in general, now we're seeing enterprises that are dealing with significant amount of DDoS, and it's not only those old traditional volumetric attacks that were SYN floods, ICMP floods, UDP floods, all those other things, but now we've moved up the scale. And we are seeing SSL attacks. And when I say SSL renegotiation, SSL floods, but then HTTP attacks via SSL. And what's so critical about that is even the cloud providers, right? Or even the scrubbers that exist in the service provider, they can't do anything about it because the first time that you're actually going to see it is on premise. So just to reiterate what we talked about here, right, is that the attacks really they moved beyond just the network attack. Yeah. We now have SSL attacks, we have HTTP attacks, we have obviously DNS attacks that they've been prevalent for some time. But in addition, we are now seeing 11 and 12 of these attacks all being launched at the same time. So the complexity has become significant because imagine us being in a SOC and having to deal with such an attack. Right, you're having to deal with all 12 attacks at the same time and in implementing mitigation. With F5, that becomes very seamless because back to the intrinsic capabilities are full proxy. You go up the stack and you hit TCP and you got send flood. You go up SSL, you have renegotiation. You have HTTP. You have you can look at HTTP floods. We can deal with all of those attacks through one flow through our box.
Yeah, and that's actually critical more for the enterprises that do not have obviously a managed service or security operations, where 11 attacks coming at the same time is likely going to be 7 or 8 different departments within the organization looking at that, and to get to to a state where all those teams are working together is time. It's a long time. Whereas in an environment where you have all of that within one platform, one team managing that platform, it simplifies and expedites the troubleshooting effort to manage that and get over the hump.
Absolutely.
I've seen several of the customers that I've talked to with different vendor firewalls actually completing the DDoS is what I call it, because they count the sessions and then they stop the traffic. So good and bad traffic is stopped to protect the application servers from rolling over. And it's like, well, our approach is different. Let's filter out the bad traffic and let more through, right? So in order to do that, you have to actually be able to recognize what traffic is good and what is bad. And you also have to have a high packets per second and concurrent session and throughput levels on your box, and we do that. So yeah, so it is actually a really big driver for us from those perspectives.
Yeah. Okay. We have some more questions now. Can I do IP6 to 4 and AFM rules at the same time?
Yeah, I mean they're separate. Doing 6 to 4 with our CGNAT and doing AFM rules, they work together, obviously, and they're separate modules that do it. So there's nothing that stops them from working together.
Okay. So is DDoS still a big driver for AFM adoption?
Absolutely.
we just got touched on that a few minutes. Yeah.
I mean, the key thing, remember, we have to keep reiterating this, right? Is that AFM is designed for a data center, and data centers, we've seen DDoS is becoming prevalent for all data centers.
Yeah.
This is, when you look at the expansion, just of internet, right? You look at Seattle. I saw a Seattle map the other day of all the homes that are going to have 1 gig. I mean, imagine that you can have one strip of houses that have the capacity right now, in Seattle in a very short amount of time to launch a DDoS attack that is greater than most corporations in greater Seattle currently have, right?
Yeah.
And so as as we continue to see these emerging trends where you have all these other countries that are popping up computers like you wouldn't believe and having pirated software, that we all know about that problem. But the interesting thing that we're now seeing, of course, is we're expanding into the fact that you're seeing Amazon, they're going and doing a cross-site script, stealing a credit card, taking that credit card, going and buying resources on Amazon, using server capacity that is far stronger than you'd ever see out of a traditional botnet, and then bringing down an infrastructure. Now think about what's going to happen when all of a sudden, you have all these homes that are already included in that with this level of throughput. So we are on the very, very, infancy of this threat spectrum. And, the reality is it is going to become as common. There was a day that we didn't know spam, right? Remember when we used to have spam relays? And it used to actually be acceptable on the internet. It's going to be the same in the future where, there's not a company that's ever established without a firewall. This isn't a prediction, this is a fact. Companies in themselves need DDoS to be integrated within their firewall. In the traditional firewalls, they can't do it because they're not designed for it.
Yeah. Good deal. All right, how big can the blacklists be? So, and then how many entries?
And then, so we have a feature called IP intelligence within Big IP, and obviously it's leveraged in the environments where we have AFM deployed, and where there's categories of bad actors, we call them, and we can actually choose based on category what we do with those categories, whether we just log or if we block or permit, That's a third-party feed coming in. I actually don't know the size of that. I don't know if you know or remember the size, but it's quite large.
I mean, it depends on a per platform basis, right? I mean, there's a lot of variables that exist there. IP intelligence obviously leverages blacklist, but not certain of the exact total capacity.
I haven't heard that it being a problem where it's not big enough because it supports the list that comes in from that service. We are adding in a future release the ability to whitelist over that, which gives us, let's say that a subnet is blacklisted, and you want one of those IP addresses to get through. You can whitelist it, and then it overrides that blacklist from the service without turning the service off. And with that, we can actually also put custom blacklisting as well, which is what they're asking for there. And you can. We've actually seen customers saying that they want to create a script from a log output of maybe IPS on a network that's saying here's a bad source address, and then you can blacklist that on all of your big IPs and AFMs.
So is that something within the configuration of AFM, or is that at that point with the custom blacklisting, is that iRules?
No, it's part of AFM, and it's just simply pointing it to a server, an FTP server, where there's a list that you maintain outside of the box, so that multiple boxes can take advantage of it.
Okay. Can you tie in the iRules specific to a blacklisting environment, so you could use something like sideband connections to call out to a service?
Good idea.
I mean, it's done in other scenarios. I just didn't know it was specific to AFM if that's possible. But yeah, you can use sideband connections to pull a service. Yeah. I've even seen a couple customers who are using DNS Express to feed in blacklist information instead of DNS. So.
Well, of course, I mean, iRules have the capability to pull that in, and AFM is integrated within iRules now, right, from a policy. So I mean, the key thing is that iRules in itself is extremely powerful. And what we're doing is we're simplifying the consumption of iRules, because the power of iRules, the reality of the situation is when you look at how much you can actually control within a packet, right? I mean, iRules we've been talking about forever, right? They're on the data plane, but now we just came out with iCall as well that has the capability of doing control plane iRules.
Yes.
Right? And everyone's talking about this SDN term, and everyone loves to talk about SDN. And we've seen a bunch of architectures that exist out there that are a bunch of blah, right? The reality of the situation is when you have the capacity to deal with the standard policies that we're talking about in a firewall, but then you have the capability to alter things based on data plane, but now alter things based on control plane. Imagine this. I got a DDoS policy that is non-strict. It's normal business traffic. But now I'm under DDoS attack, and I've got a significant DDoS attack, right? And I still need services to be available, but I'm going to limit those services because it's better to have a site that's up and operational and monetizing than it is to have a site that's completely down. Now with control plane iRules and iCall, we have the capability to dynamically change policy based on data plane.
Right.
So imagine that. I'm looking at it, I look at a threshold, I meet a certain threshold, I switch a particular policy. Nobody on the planet is doing anything that's even close to that. And so you can talk SDN, like we're looking at that as, software-defined application services where you are able to, truly have control over your environment through a dynamic policy perspective.
Yeah, and that's really critical. We actually talked in the iRules class yesterday about that, being able to bidirectionally control, or to impact control plane from the data plane, but then also the vice versa, control the data plane from control plane. And having that bidirectional relationship is huge.
It's very, very important.
Yeah, cool. All right, do people run AFM in virtual editions? What is the scenario there?
Absolutely. We have virtual editions for all of the modules that we do in security, and even combos with the modules for virtual editions. It's where you're deploying your servers in a virtual machine, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go in and out of that virtual environment to do LTM and firewalling together. So absolutely see that as it's becoming increasingly more popular.
Okay. I mean, we see a lot of cloud, companies consuming it as VEs, but we also, if you got smaller amount of bandwidth, but yet you still need that level of protection. I mean, obviously it can be leveraged there. I mean, the reality of the situation is that the main difference between the hardware and the software, right, is the fact that, VE is limited on bandwidth. But something else that is important, right, is that there is a reason that we have focused on creating virtual editions and creating hardware, is because there is a necessity for hardware in certain instances. For instance, SSL termination in that article that we look at, we blew the numbers out, right? SSL was phenomenal. You look at our competitors, they don't even come close, right? As it relates to the firewall market. The second thing in that is DDoS. We just pushed 25 more features, right, into hardware. So when we look at it, we look at a roadmap. We're not creating a hardware roadmap that exists a year in a platform. We just came out with the 10-2000, right? We have the capability, as Tom comes up with new features, to drive those features into hardware. And when you can handle network DDoS, you want to handle that early, often and early, right? Get it out of the way and process it at the earliest component within the box. That should be done at a hardware level.
Yeah, and TMS is TMM is like screaming fast, but hardware is always going to be faster.
There's always, for us, we're coming out with a bunch of new reference architectures. We're going to continue to drive, the message to our customers of when you would leverage a VE compared to when you would leverage hardware. But there's purposes for both.
Yeah. Okay. Are the firewall rules compatible with FastL4 virtual servers?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no reason why they wouldn't work with them. Depending on what you're doing with your virtual servers, we want it to be as flexible as possible, so yes.
Okay, so maybe a little clarification on that one would be so for HTTP-based policy rules, they'll also work with the FastL4 profile?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, why isn't there iControl APIs for AFM?
Well, I'm thinking about what that would be, what would really be used for, and we're planning some third-party control from other devices and actually modifying the rules from that, and that's kind of where I would see that being used. So. Just haven't got there yet, I guess, is an honest way to answer that, but we're looking into doing it.
So how is the Big IQ managing the boxes? Is it?
So they're using the newest version of iControl.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they are using, the new version of iControl has the capability to do TMSH over obviously that API. And
Gotcha.
the cool thing about the newer version of the overall API of iControl is the fact that we're driving to a point where we're going to have a 1-for-1 ratio on TMSH. And imagine that when you look at iControl in itself, we all know that we are not the only security player that's going to exist within a network. Right. We know, and if you look at, we are finally to a state. Forever we've been talking about, software-defined overall networking, right, or service-oriented architecture. We are finally to a point where you look at companies like F5, you got a GRC, we can communicate that GRC, and you have a 1-for-1 ratio as it relates to TMSH. So GRCs like the Archers and the RSAs of the world, or a SIM type device. So our objective in moving forward is we will continue to fully expand all AFM capabilities via TMSH, and those will be exposed via the latest version of iControl. And we can update the blog later on any further details on roadmap that's associated to that.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal. Well, I think that we can wrap up here. I appreciate your guys' time coming out and talking about the advanced firewall module. Exciting product and exciting space, being just exciting all around with the security offerings from F5 with the advanced firewall module and some of the other products, including ASM and the data center firewall as well. So thank you, community, and we're going to leave the chat session open probably another 20 or 30 minutes. If you have questions, drop them in there and we'll answer them offline later on. Thank you.